In this, Am Hamel told us that enslavement is a curse for any nation, as it deprives its own identity, and the ruling government compels them to abide by the rules, justified or unjustified. But at such time, it is their language which keeps them their identity. So that's why he told us not to forget their own language. Then he opened a grammar and read us our lesson. I was amazed to see how well I understood it. All he said seemed so easy, so easy. I think to that I had never listened so carefully. Now, what happened after telling them the importance of their own language? Mr. Hamill, he opened a grammar book and started telling them about the grammar topics. And our little Franz, he was so amazed to see that how beautifully he understood all the concepts of the grammar that Mr. M. Hamill told him today. He realized that he had never listened it so carefully, that's why he never understood anything, and that he had never explained everything with so much patience. Or maybe his teacher had never explained so much carefully and with patience, that's why he understood it today well. It seemed almost as if the poor man wanted to give us all he knew before going away and to put it all into our heads at one stroke. Franz told us that that day was seeming that Amhamel wanted to tell each and everything about French today that he knew. He wanted to tell them, he wanted to put each and everything into their heads at one stroke. After the grammar, we had a lesson in writing. That day, M. Hamel had new copies for us, written in beautiful round hand. France, Alsace, France, Alsace. They looked like little flags floating everywhere in the schoolroom, hung from the rod at the top of our desks. You ought to have seen how everyone set to work and how quiet it was. The only sound was the scratching of the pens over the paper. Once some beetles flew in, but nobody paid any attention to them, not even the littlest ones, who worked right on tracing their fish hooks as if that French was too. On the roof, the pigeons cooed very low, and I thought to myself, will they make them sing in German, even the pigeons? So, now what happened after the grammar topic? Am Hamel started to teach them the writing section. That day, he distributed a beautiful copies written in a beautiful round hand. It was written France Alsace, France Alsace. It looked like that little flags were floating everywhere in their schoolroom, hung from the rod at the top of their desks. You ought have to seen how everyone set to work. Friends, our little friends told us that we all must realize that how the people started writing French on their notebooks and how patient, quiet everybody was there. The only sound was there of the scratching of the pens over the paper. Once there was beetles flew in, but nobody paid any attention to it. Not even the little stars, the little ones who worked right on tracing their fish hooks as if that was French too. On the roof, the pigeons cooed very low. What happened on the roof of the class? There were pigeons who were cooing very low, and I thought to myself, Franz thought to himself, will they make them sing in German also? Even the pigeons? He was thinking that whether they would make even the pigeons sing in German. He meant that they had grown up using French as their language. Now, Germans are taking away their language, but it is unfair and unkind because the language was as natural to them as cooing is to pigeon. So whenever he looked up from writing, he saw M. Hamel sitting motionless in his chair and gazing first at one thing, then at another, as he wanted to fix in his mind just how everything looked in that little schoolroom. Fancy, for 40 years he had been there in the same place with his garden outside the window and his class in front of him. What happened when everybody was busy in writing? Friends saw his master, M. Hamel, who was sitting motionless in his chair as looking at each and everything in that schoolroom and wanted to fix each and everything into his eyes where he spent his 40 years of life and with his garden outside the window and his class in front of him. So he wanted to tell us that his master wanted to save all the memories that was there, that was united with him for the 40 years where he had spent. Just like that, only the desks and the benches had been worn smooth. The walnut trees in the garden were taller, and the hop vine that he had planted himself twined about the windows to the roof. How it must have broken his heart to leave it all, poor man, to hear his sister moving about in the room above, packing their trunks, for they must leave the country next day. Now, what happened? The benches, the desks. Am Hamel was looking each and everything. The walnut tree in his garden was taller. The hop vine that he had planted for himself about the windows to the roof. He was looking each and everything that he had planted for himself in that garden. Now he had to leave. His sister upstairs was packing their stuffs because they have to leave tomorrow. But he had the courage to hear every lesson to the very last. After the writing, we had a lesson in the history, and then the babies chanted their ba ba bee boo. Down there at the back of the room, old Hauser had put on his spectacles and, holding his primer in both hands, spelled the letters with them. You could see that he too was crying. His voice trembled with emotion, and it was so funny to hear him that we all wanted to laugh and cry. Ah, how well I remember it, that last lesson. Now, what happened after writing? Am Hamel listened each and every writing that was written today by them, and he has the courage to listen it. After the writing, they had a history chapter, they had a history lesson, and then the babies chanted their Baba Bee. Down there at the back of the room, old Hauser, our old farmer who was there with his primary book in his hand, spelled the letters with the babies, and friends told that you could see that he too was crying. His voice was trembling with emotion, and it was too funny to hear that we all wanted to laugh and cry together because that was their last lesson and they wanted to remember it. They wanted to save all the memories related to that last lesson. All at once, the church clock struck 12. Then the Angelus. At the same moment, the trumpets of the Prussians returning from drill sounded under our windows. Am Hamel stood up, very pale in his chair. I never saw him look so tall. Now, what happened when old Hauser was repeating the words with that kids? At once the church clock struck 12. Then the Angelus. Angelus is a devotion in memory of Annunciation. Annunciation is the announcement for the prayer. So at the same moment, the trumpets of the Prussian soldiers who were returning back from their drilling sounded under our windows. Now, M. Hamel stood up. He was looking very pale in his chair and he never looked so tall. My friend said he, but something choked him, he could not go on. He wanted to say something, but what happened? Something choked him. Choked here means that something, it seemed that something struck in his throat. He wanted to tell something, but it was choked. He could not speak. Then he turned to the blackboard, took a piece of chalk, and bearing on with all his might, with all his strength he had, he wrote as large as he could. Vive la France. Vive la France is in a French language which means live long France. Then he stopped and leaned his head against the wall, and without a word he made a gesture to us with his hand. School is dismissed. You may go. Hamel did not have the courage to say anything. That's why he wrote on the board as big as he could write, Vive la France, which means that he wanted to say, May live long France. Then he told everybody the class is dismissed and you can go. So, with this, your chapter is finished. But here I wanted to discuss the main theme of this chapter. This chapter stresses on the importance of education and the necessity to respect and learn one's own language. It is the duty of every citizen to safeguard the language of the country as it is the identity of our country. Mother tongue. Mother tongue is our own language which gives our own identity, respect, and freedom.